Welcome to the Perfect Florida A1A road trip itinerary. For starters, I just want to say that this was officially renamed to the Jimmy Buffett Memorial Highway. So you may see that used interchangeably, or even when you're using like your Google Maps or Apple Maps or something, that these mean the same thing. Basically, if you're ever unsure, whatever the main road is closest to the ocean, that is likely to be A1A. So this goes from the very top tip of Northeast Florida all the way down to Key West. So I recommend starting there, like getting there maybe like the night before so that you can actually drive the full distance. There's a Hampton Inn. We personally like to use Hampton Inn because most of them have free parking, but when you're in like actual cities, sometimes not. But they also include free breakfast. It's Hilton's most like affordable type of brand while still being high quality, and they're just kind of conveniently placed for road trips. But if you want to splurge, there's a Ritz-Carlton here too. So this very top tip is Amelia Island. This is a bit of what it looks like. They have a historic downtown, and since it's kind of off the coast, you kind of have some water on both sides. So on your first day of driving, I recommend going from the very top of A1A down to St. Augustine. This is about a 2-hour driving stretch. Since a lot of it is like a surface street with stoplights and stuff, it does take longer than if you were to drive down like I-95, which runs parallel but a little bit more inland. But that's just not scenic, and it kind of defeats the purpose of doing an A1A road trip. So if you want to start off in the morning, maybe watch a sunrise, go to breakfast, explore the Amelia Island area, I would also make sure that you stop at the Welcome Center before you leave. This is what it looks like. It's an old train station. They'll have like brochures and coupons and things that may be helpful to you throughout your trip, and also people can answer any questions that you might have. From here, one of the first stops that you can make along the way, some places that you'll pass will be Jacksonville. That's about an hour and a half. So if you wanted to kind of stop at some of the more popular like beaches or towns along the way to break up your drive, you can definitely do that too. So Jacksonville Beach, which you'll also see abbreviated as Jack's Beach. They have a handful of places right there around the pier. If you're ever unsure exactly where to stop, if you look for where the pier is on any beaches, that's usually where like all the restaurants and possibly like restrooms and things like that are all going to be. But they have an Irish pub, some burger places, and some pizza places. You'll always find like seafood places as well. And then from there, it's about an hour to St. Augustine. I would personally plan to spend as much time in your day in St. Augustine as possible, just because there really is a lot to do there. I've listed a few of the popular activities here, but I also have a full day's itinerary for exploring St. Augustine. But there's a historic fort here that you can go. You can even just go on the outside if you don't want to like pay to tour the inside. There is a distillery here in the historic downtown stretch that is actually, it's a free tasting. You're just required to leave a tip. It can technically be as little as you want, but for more ways to fill your whole day, this post will have all those details. Here's a little bit of what St. Augustine looks like. And while you're in town, I recommend going to Meehan's Irish Pub and Seafood House for dinner. They have really good fish and chips and mac and cheese and a really good bread pudding for dessert. And then for drinks, the Teeny Martini Bar is very popular. And then Isabella's Bar Cuba, they have a good sangria, and you can get like some wines and stuff. But in the evening, I recommend doing a ghost tour. So we've been doing ghost tours around a handful of places around the US. And this is one of like the top places to do it because St. Augustine is the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement in the US. So there's like a very long history. So it's very haunted. A lot of the tours will take you around the cemetery, and then there's also tours that will take you like around a golf cart, so you can go to more than just that historic downtown section. And then I would also just stay in St. Augustine for the evening. If you want to stay in town, that way you can like park there in town and then walk around to everything the whole rest of the day. The Hilton St. Augustine Historic Bayfront is a really great place to stay. If you're trying to save money, then I would probably just find a place to park for the day and then stay like just outside of town at like the nearest Hampton Inn or something like that. The reason I wouldn't drive like further, I think I mentioned this somewhere later in the post, but the whole point of driving A1A is that it's very scenic. So if you're driving it at nighttime, you're not really seeing anything. So you want to see the coastline and drive the coastline during the day. So the second day, you'll make your way from St. Augustine down to the Space Coast. So this area is where you're getting down to kind of like the central coast of Florida. It's about 3.5 hours to get from St. Augustine all the way down to like the Cocoa Beach, Port Canaveral kind of area, if you're driving the actual A1A road the whole time, which is what I recommend. The first thing I would say to make sure that you make time for is the Kennedy Space Center. It's a little bit expensive, like it's almost the same as like some theme park admission, but you can spend a decent amount of time there, and they have some cool like interactive activities. And it is one of those kind of like bucket list type places to go do. So I would kind of drive straight there. If you wanted to stop in like Daytona Beach along the way, because that's very popular, you can fit that in too as well during your drive. And then you'll just want to make sure that you eat before you go in, since you'll spend several hours there, so the timing may be a little awkward. Daytona Beach is kind of like halfway between, so if you're driving like 3 hours, it would be like an hour and a half into your drive. So if you did maybe like a brunch there, that might be enough to hold you over until you're done at the Kennedy Space Center. Or if you just want to stop in like Titusville or somewhere in that area to eat before you go in, that'll be like the closest city. Some ideas for some places to go to: there are some like regional chains or chains that are in like touristy areas that if you've never been to them, I recommend. I personally love Sonny's Barbecue. It is so good. They're kind of spread out through quite a bit of the South now, but if you've never been, I recommend going there. Okay, so once you get to the Kennedy Space Center, you can see the Space Shuttle Atlantis. There's a replica mission control room. They kind of have some prototypes of like future space travel things. There's some outdoor exhibits to do. There's some indoor interactive things. There's some add-ons that you can do. There's just kind of a little bit of everything. Here's kind of the example of outside. They have all these rocket ships placed all over. All the others are standing straight up. This is the one that's on its side, but it's a really neat experience. I do have a full blog post of everything about the Kennedy Space Center and planning your trip if you want more details. From there, it's about a 20 or 30 minute drive, it kind of depends, over to the Port Canaveral and Cocoa Beach area. I recommend going to like near like the Jetty Park, or there's this place called the Exploration Tower that's kind of like a mini museum, and it's where you can see all the cruise ships coming and going. So at dinner time, I know a lot of cruise ships tend to leave like around 4 o'clock-ish, but you may still be able to see some cruise ships going out. I like to go see like the Disney cruise ships. You can check the schedule in advance to see what ships might be there, but there's a few seafood places that are all right there in that section across from Exploration Tower. Over the years, I've kind of been to all of them, so I don't really have a strong preference either way. I would just like check the menus and see if one or the other has something that sounds more interesting to you, and just kind of pick from there. And then for the rest of the evening, you could head over to the Cocoa Beach Pier and check out like Ron John Surf Shop if you've never been. It's a great place to get souvenirs. You can, walk around the beach or hang out at the beach. There's a few mini golf courses. There's one called Golf and Gator that we really like. It just depends on how late those stay open, because that one has some go-karts. And then once you are ready to go in for the night, there is a Hampton Inn there in the Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral area. So that is, again, where I would stay. It's a really great place for road tripping hotels. On the third day, you'll make your way down to the Treasure Coast, which is the next portion of the coast where it's kind of a little bit, it's not the South Coast, but it's a little bit farther than South Central, I guess. I don't know. So you'll be driving from Cocoa Beach all the way to West Palm Beach. Actually, I think I have it going all the way to Fort Lauderdale this day, actually. It just kind of depends on what places you want to stop at. So the total distance for that will be about 5 hours. This portion is where you'll start seeing a lot of like the mega mansions along the beach. The first half a lot of it is a little bit more scenic and like undeveloped. in a lot of places, but once you get kind of down to about West Palm Beach on south, that's going to be like all your massive like mega mansions, which is also really nice to look at. So I do have a 2-day itinerary for this whole region if you want some more ideas on things to do in this area, if you want to spend some more time there. But the first portion of this drive, so from leaving Cocoa Beach to get to Fort Pierce, which is kind of the top-ish portion of the Treasure Coast, that will take you about 2 hours. And this portion of the drive is also entirely island chains that are off the coast of Florida. So it's going to be scenic for you like on both sides. You're not going to be on the mainland at all for the part. A really cool activity, they have the Navy SEAL Museum here, and they have the obstacle course that you can try your luck at and see how good you do, or see how hard it really is if you think you would do good at it. So that's a really fun activity that's just right there. You're not going to have to like detour or anything to go to that. Some of these other things in this itinerary, you'll go inland a bit to like Port St. Lucie, but they're not really that far out of the way. For lunch, I recommend Manatee Island Bar and Grill. This is in Fort Pierce, and it's right there on A1A, so again, you don't have to detour. They have a lot of seafood things. I've had a little bit of everything from their menu, but I actually really enjoy their chicken lettuce wraps. It might be only a special because I only had it on this most recent trip, but those are really, like, they're good, like, light and fresh for, like, a beach day, while still being, like, very savory. And then they have really good key lime pie. Pretty much any restaurant on this that I'm going to recommend has a really good key lime pie. So if you like it, I recommend sampling all the key lime pies throughout Florida. This is what the restaurant looks like. On this other side, you can kind of see in the back is an inlet, so you can see boats coming and going. So it's a scenic restaurant as well. Then from here, you will just continue your drive down to Fort Lauderdale, which will take about 3 hours. If you wanted to stop anywhere along the way, I really like there's a parking lot labeled South Beach Parking Lot on Hutchinson Island, which is in the area of this. That's a really nice beach. It's not really too crowded, and they have bathrooms there and everything. So if you wanted any beach time, that would be a good kind of more quieter beach. And then some places you'll pass along the way will be Palm Beach and Boca Raton. So that's where you'll get all the beach mansions. And I mentioned it earlier too, that like anytime you come across a pier, that's likely a pretty good place to stop that will have restaurants, shops, bathrooms, things like that. So for dinner, anywhere, I recommend the Lauderdale by the Sea beach. So Fort Lauderdale itself has like a whole string of different beaches. I like the Lauderdale by the Sea area. There's some regional chains. It's very popular, either like seafood and pizza and burgers. I feel like are kind of like the 3 top ones you'll see. So it just kind of depends on what you're in the mood for and budget and things like that. I think there used to be a Bubba Gump there, but I don't see it on the website anymore. So I don't know if it's still there or if I'm just misremembering, but my grandparents used to live there. So I don't know how I would get the wrong beach, but who knows. So for the evening, the activity that I recommend here, since you're getting into the more pricier areas of Florida, I would recommend, you probably are going to have to spend a little bit more on your hotel, especially if you're staying kind of on the path. So I would make sure that you're able to use the amenities at your resort. So a lot of these will have like rooftop pools or like private beach access or activities and things. So I would just use the evening to do that. If you're not familiar with the True by Hilton brand, it's kind of like their modern version of Hampton Inn. So it's supposed to be on the cheaper side, but it's very like modern, trendy, sleek. And I think it's geared more towards like either like student groups or like it's kind of the vibe of like a group of backpackers around Europe or something, where it's like instead of a hostel, you have like an actual real hotel room. But they're really nice, especially when they're in nicer locations. They are like significantly nicer than like your average location. So this one in particular does have a rooftop pool because it's like right there, like downtown Fort Lauderdale. Okay, so then the 4th day, you will make your way from Fort Lauderdale to Miami, which is only about 60 miles, but traffic, if you're driving A1A through Miami, especially once you get to South Beach, there's a bridge to cross back to like the mainland area, which goes into downtown Miami. That can get very backed up. So it's kind of like LA traffic where it's like, I lived in Anaheim, and it was only 30 miles from LA, but most of the time it would take about an hour and a half. Unless you're going at like 3 in the morning, then it takes like 45 minutes. But here, so it could take as long as 4 hours. So I would kind of plan for extra time, even if the GPS tells you when you're leaving that it's not as long. I would plan for the extra time just in case. But it is going to take at least 2 hours for sure, just because if you're going 60 miles and you're on a surface street where you can only go 25, 35 miles per hour, that will take you 2 hours without any traffic. So in the morning, you will drive to Miami. If you want to stop at Hollywood Beach along the way, they have a really good boardwalk area. And then once you get into Miami, they have some really nice Art Deco architecture that's nice to look at. And then Miami also has South Beach if you wanted to stop there. And then for lunch, we really liked the Versailles Cuban restaurant. I do have a post that one of my blogging friends wrote of the best Cuban restaurants in Miami, but we really like Versailles. It's only about 10 minutes of a detour. Once you've gone back through downtown Miami, it's kind of in that area. So this is some pulled pork that we had gotten, and I really like their Cuban sandwich, which is pretty basic, but it's good. And then they also had kind of like a bakery for different like pastries you could take to go and some coffees to go. And then for the afternoon, I would visit Biscayne National Park. So it's about an hour's drive from the restaurant. Most of the park is underwater, so you kind of have to explore it by boat. And here I have a blog post explaining how to go about all of it and everything that we did. But they have a company that they work with that charters all these different, you can do groups or small groups depending on your budget and what you want to do. And for ours, we had booked a sailing tour, but there was no wind that day, so we took just like a regular boat instead. But ours included snorkeling and stand-up paddle boarding. If you don't want to do any of the particular activities, you don't have to. Like, I didn't go snorkeling. I just spent that time on the boat, but the stand-up paddle boarding was really nice, and we had lunch here on this little key. So I definitely recommend that. They have smaller ones too that are just kind of like out and back sailings. You don't have to do like an all-day adventure like this either. The phone service is not great in this area, by the way, so you may be kind of like dead to the world the whole time you're out here, so keep that in mind. My mom had like blown up my phone when we got back in the car and we finally got back out like away from the park. I had just calls and messages of being like, where are you? What are you doing? Why aren't you answering? And I'm like, I was on a boat for 6 hours, like, relax. And like you knew what I was doing today. So keep that in mind. And then for dinner, so you can kind of do a couple things. As you're leaving Biscayne to keep going down A1A, there's a couple kind of like small towns there on the mainland of Florida that you could stop and stay there. Those will definitely be cheap, but there's not a ton of like unique restaurants to choose from, but that would definitely be the cheaper option. Or if you drive all the way to Key Largo, which is like the very first of the keys once you get out in that area, that takes about an hour. And there are a couple of restaurants right there that are like on the water that you can sit and have dinner at. And then if you need something to do like later in the evening, since the keys are kind of like at an angle, you kind of have beaches facing every direction. So if you go to one that's slightly more west facing, then you could watch a sunset. And there, of course, is again another Hampton Inn right here in Key Largo. It is going to usually cost a little bit more than your average Hampton Inn, but it would be one of your most affordable options on Key Largo. If not, then I would just stay there like in Homestead or like anywhere just kind of south of Miami. If you want to splurge a little bit, there's this thing called the Hilton Curio Collection. These are kind of like boutique resorts a little bit. There's one called Baker's Key Resort there in Key Largo that you could stay at as well. And then the last full day you will be spending in Key West. So from Key Largo to Key West, it's about a 2-hour drive. And by the time you get to Key West, that will be the southernmost point of the continental US, and that is where A1A ends. I would personally try to leave by 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. at the latest to drive down to Key West so you can spend the most time possible there. For lunch, if you've never been to Margaritaville, this is kind of the one to go to. You can get a cheeseburger in paradise and of course get a slice of key lime pie. If you don't want to do a chain restaurant or you've been to Margaritaville before, there's a place called Sloppy Joe's Bar, and it is a place that Ernest Hemingway is known was known for going to. So that one's very popular to visit as well. Here's the key lime pie from Margaritaville. And then for the afternoon, just explore all of Key West. So my favorites are, you can take a tour through Ernest Hemingway's home, and you can also visit Harry Truman's Little White House. They do tours. The best way to get around though, so that like you don't have to drive around or anything, they have this conch train that it's kind of like, it looks like the trams like in the Disney parking lots that take you around. It's a hop on hop off thing with a bunch of stops all around Key West. So you can just take that throughout the day to get around so that you don't have to drive around or walk around. One of the stops will be the southernmost point buoy, so I definitely recommend going there. If you're able to, Dry Tortugas National Park is here. You do have to book a like ferry boat or a seaplane, and generally it's going to have to be in advance. We were not able to do it on our trip because everything was booked out. And I think our trip was kind of last minute, and it was like in the summer. Like I think it was like June or July. So that might take a little more planning in advance. But to check off another national park that is somewhat remote would be a good thing to do here as well. And then for dinner, Mallory Square is kind of like the center downtown kind of thing. It's where all the like shops and restaurants and some of the really nice resorts are, and where people just kind of like hang out. So there's a lot of restaurants here, but we like the Conch Republic Seafood Company. They're known for their conch chowder. It's kind of more chili-like than like you would think like of a like New England clam chowder. I didn't really care for it personally, but I've gone I think 3 times now. And usually I just get some type of shrimp and any sort of drink that sounds good. I like pina coladas, but for dessert, they have a hot pineapple upside down rum cake, and that is the main draw of the restaurant for me. This is what the view looks like around Mallory Square. So this is like sunset with some of the sailboats out. And then for the evening, I would just hang out here in Mallory Square. There's like some live entertainment. You usually have kind of like that warm, humid-ish breeze that's really nice in Florida at night. Again, the hotels here tend to be more expensive. We stayed at the DoubleTree that is not there in the center of town. It's up towards the airport, which is like 10 or 15 minutes away. And even that was still more expensive than the other places during our trip. But there are some places in the Mallory Square area if you are able to splurge. That way you can be right there and not have to drive around or anything like that. But again, if you're splurging for hotels, I would make sure that you make time to enjoy the amenities and get your money's worth out of it. And then for day 6 is just kind of a choose your own adventure. If you need to just drive back the way you came to wherever you need to go, or if you're going to go on a cruise ship, you can extend your vacation and take a cruise out of Key West. When we did this trip, this section here of more fun places to visit in Florida. So when we did this trip, we did it round trip from Orlando. So we didn't go all the way up to Amelia Island. We went from Orlando to St. Augustine on down. And then when we left Key West, we went to the Everglades and we did this airboat tour. And then from there, we drove up the Gulf Coast to Tampa, spent a day in Tampa, and then came back to Disney World because we were flying in and out of Orlando for that trip. I do have an itinerary that is that full week's road trip. That is like the exact things that we did, whereas this one is just that A1A portion, driving it from start to finish. You can also do this in reverse, by the way. Depending on what logistically makes sense for you, you can start in Key West and drive all the way up to Amelia Island. If you did that, the ocean's always going to be on your right. So for the passenger, it might be easier for like taking photos and videos and things like that. But it's really just personal preference. It's just kind of a guideline of how you can space out the drives and some of the highlights to see along the way. And I do have a road trip planning spreadsheet if you like to do kind of these longer, more involved trips. It's exactly how we plan our trips and budget them and figure out the logistics of what can you do in a day, how can we fit in all of the things that we want to do and things like that. And that is everything I have for the Florida A1A road trip itinerary.